Welcome back to Worth the Effort Woodworking. This video is going to be the second section on our chapter on saws. And in the first section, we really went into the design of saws, why they are built that way, why the different styles of saws are out there, how much engineering went into it. It really is cool to think that these things have evolved to just cut straight lines all day long as we, the meat muscles, just get out of their way. Now in this video, we're going to focus on techniques for using the back saw. But I'm sure based on the knowledge you gained in the first section that you understand that a saw is basically just a plate with a bunch of chisels attached. And based on the first chapter, we understand the interaction between blades and the fibers that they cut. So you can take the knowledge you gained from learning about the back saw and apply it to all different types of saws. Also, keep an eye out for this in this video. We're going to start putting that little symbol out there to show you the different tools that we make here that we offer for sale to y'all to help support this channel and allow us to produce this stuff. Cool little things like this latest little dovetail marker we just came out with. So, let's get busy and learn how to use a saw. Now the materials we're going to be using for this exercise is a 1x2 piece of red oak. I got this from one of the big box stores, and they say it's a 1 inch by 2 inch, but in reality it's a 3/4 inch by 1.5 inches. The reason being is you buy lumber, and we are going to go a lot more into this when we get to this chapter on wood. You buy lumber in its rough state. If you want it nice and plain and straight and squared up, you're paying for that extra service, and that takes away a little wood. So when they say it's a 1x2, in actuality, it's really about a 3/4 inch by about 1.5 inches. And that's fairly consistent. But whatever, for this particular project, the ratio is a 2-to-1 ratio, which is what we're looking for. And if you want to do this exercise, go ahead and buy your stick. This one, I believe, is about 8 feet long. Get a nice hardwood, a maple or a oak. Don't go for poplar or pine. Get something nice and hard for this particular exercise. The tools we're going to be using, as I said earlier, we're going to focus on the carcass saw, which is a nice joinery saw. It's a great all-around saw if you're getting one. This particular one's carcass saws are generally filed cross-cut because most of your joinery is done cross-cut, but they will do some minor ripping too. We are also going to use a chisel, mallet, various marking utensils, some squares, and most importantly, you're going to want a set of bench hooks. Now, bench hooks are something that can turn basically any table into work surface. If you have a park bench or something like that, grab a set of bench hooks and you can do this exercise. You don't need a nice workbench to do this. And basically what they are is a plank of wood, and on one side you have a fairly tall fence that is in line. And whenever I make these, I generally make a wide board and I cut it in half to get 2 versions. And the critical point is getting this exactly 90 degrees so that when you spread them apart, they will work. On the back side, you have another piece of wood, also at 90 degrees. I like to use rulers just because they're about the same height, and I can also use it as a planing stop, so it just makes it a little bit more functional. And you will also notice one of mine are cut out, so I can also use it as a shooting board. But how these work is basically, you put them on the workbench, you slide your piece up against it, and the reason why you want it 90 degrees is because on a long board, you can stretch this one way out there and it will still maintain 90 degrees. And this gives you a chance to use your body as a clamp. These are wonderful tools that can be easily made with a couple of screws. Just screw it down there, screw it down there. You got yourself a bench hook. I end up remaking these every 3 to 6 months just because they wear out. They are utility devices. So before we get going on the exercise, let's talk about frequency. Okay, frequency is just a measure of how many times something repeats over a set period of time. And when you're talking in the science world of vibrations, audio waves, radio waves, light, mechanical vibrations, waves, all that kind of stuff, you're generally talking about hertz, which is a unit of measure accredited to a very famous German scientist, Heinrich Hertz. Anyways, what I found is that a lot of times when you change subject matter, even though the terminology changes, a lot of the theories behind those terms maintain the same. When we're talking about waves, we're talking about the amplitude, how high the wave goes, how much power is being induced to it. Your frequency is basically how many repetitions per second. In this example, if this took over 1 second right there, you would have 4 repetitions. You have a trough of the wave. You have the crest of the wave. You have the midline of the wave. You have the period, how much time between just 1 repetition. Now, all those are fancy terms, but in the woodworking world, when we're talking about tooth lines, we also have PPI, TPI, we have our gullets, we have our rakes, all that other kind of stuff. We have different terminologies for basically describing a wave, which if you look at a tooth line, that's basically what we have. And when you're working with a wave, it's good to understand some of the science behind waves because you can apply that. Now, wave right here is consistent over time. The one variable we have when we were talking about sawing is the time is in our control. We are the meat muscle. We are controlling how fast and how slow it goes. So that is our variable to a fixed wave. Now, is it possible for us to induce other variables? Oh yes, and most of the time it's basically us screwing up. Remember, the saw is designed to have all the force it needs downward because of gravity. They weight the tops of these backs just enough to engage the tooth. But how many of us have ever done this? You have your wood, you bring your saw up to it, and you find that it is just a little hard to start. So what do? You press harder, and then all of a sudden you come through, you're pressing really hard, and it just wants to bite, it's not doing anything. Well, if you look down in here, what you see is the results of the wave being pressed too hard. We are pressing down, we are forcing it. Thus, we are affecting the amplitude of the wave, the downward force. Remember, all the weight it needs is in this back right here. It's just going to skim the very base of it, so it's got a very slight wave. If we're pressing down into the wood, you get a big wave. And what do we have right here? You can see the results on the inside of the cut. These little jagged marks. Now, in order to continue the cut, you now have to get the saw going up and down, up and down, up and down. It's just very jarring. It's not cutting well. It just doesn't work very well. You have to press hard. And remember, the saw is designed for us just to have to move it back and forth. We shouldn't have to work hard. So the solution for that one is using gravity and controlling the one variable we should be controlling, the time. If gravity is going to fall down in those grooves with just a slight amount of movement, very hard to do. You can see I'm not pressing very hard here. If somehow you can speed up the motion, it will skim over the top so it won't go down as far. And a little increase in speed with a light pressure, and all of a sudden it cuts very well. So you're using the knowledge you have with waves to affect error correction. Another thing we want to talk about, what about the slope of a wave? Let's look at the teeth again. In saws, a lot of times we talk about the angle, the slope that the teeth are cut at. We're talking about how it rises up to the crest of the wave or how it comes down to the trough. And the coming back down to the trough is generally affected by a 60-degree triangle that we use to sharpen it. So we're really only concerned with rising up to the crest of the wave as far as how it engages wood. Now you can have a saw where the teeth are cut almost straight up and down or even slightly forward, so it's going to grab into the wood. Those are very aggressive teeth. They're going to get a lot of work done, but they're also going to take a lot more muscle to go with. Most saws come from manufacturers nowadays slightly relaxed, or that they are leaning back a little bit. It makes it a little bit easier to engage, especially for beginning woodworkers. They seem to cut a little bit smoother too. But now I want you to think about the slope of these angles and how it interacts with the boards. Which one of these would be easier to start, and where would it be easier to start on? If you have a board coming square, a square board coming off, and you want to engage the saw on the near side, well, look at these teeth. You're generally going to angle that saw a little bit, so you're going to have one tooth hitting a parallel face to the other. It's just bang, bang, bang. It's very hard to start because there's an abrupt engagement. But if you were to engage that tooth on the far side of the wood, it's kind of angled flat. This one's here. it's just skipping off. So it's a lot of times a lot easier to start a cut on the workbench on the far side of a board, on the top flat side, than it is right into the face. Unless, of course, you are able to drop that saw plate way down low and engage up coming up. Because once again, now that saw tooth is skimming over the top, allowing it to do its cutting action. It's just not slamming into that face. And that's something you also see in waves. Waves hitting a beach, a lot of times they are canted forward. A lot of their power is going into those rocks. You see rocks crumbling. To soften the wave impact, to eliminate beach corrosion, what do? They put some kind of obstacle out there so it will come over and grade and engage that beach at a slight angle to soften the impact. I think the most common one out there is this concrete jack that kind of fit together so they get it all stuck. But there's so many different angles that just kind of dissipates the wave's power. See, science, waves, woodworking applies to oceanography. So, in that same vein of thought, you explained to me why you think so many woodworkers start their cuts by pulling backwards instead of going forward. Does it have something to do with the slope of the backside of the tooth? So in this exercise, we're going to cut up this one board into a bunch of little pieces and cut out a section of it. So you're going to get a lot of practice in getting a good feel for how to make a saw cut. So it'll be second nature to you in the future. Now we just talked about the saw teeth, the slope, how to engage it. But let's quickly review what we talked about in the first episode about getting out of the way of the saw and just providing propulsion. Because we are the piston in the steam engine. Our arms are like those crankcases moving that piston back. Our only job is to move back and forth. So we have to position our bodies, our feet, our hips, our shoulders, all to allow our arm to move freely back and forth. So what have I done? I positioned my back foot facing this way, my front foot facing that way. I've gotten them roughly 45 degrees because I got a little bit more belly than a lot of people. Some people might want to go a little more, some people a little bit less. The idea is to get your hand moving as close to the center of your body so that as you push forward, you're not inducing twist. Coming back over, I start over on the far side, I engage it, I look at my dominant eye straight down the saw plate to make sure everything is in line, and I move just the part of my body to get the saw moving back and forth at a nice steady pace. Okay, I'm isolating everything but my arm, and that's how you make the cuts, nice and smooth. So for the first exercise, I want you to just go up to the end of the board and cut off maybe a ½ inch as square and perpendicular and plumb as you can. Now I don't know about yours, but mine came out halfway decently plumb, but nowhere near square. I was a good 3-4 degrees off. So let's try it again. We're going to use these initial cuts to give you a control to see how well you can improve with just a few little exercises. So cut about 1/4 inch off more. Now, did your cut not go as smoothly as that? Well, analyze what happened. Did you have a death grip? Were you not getting in? Was it binding up because you were twisting it left and right, meaning your shoulder body alignment wasn't engaged right? Maybe you were pressing down by pushing it forward. Maybe you were lifting up so it wasn't engaging because it didn't have the weight of the gravity. Or what I think the #1 problem is, were you using the whole saw? I see most students come in and it's very easy to get a saw started by kind of nibbling at the tip, because there's not much pressure there and it allows it to skim over the top a lot easier. But once they start nibbling, they never stop nibbling. They might nibble towards the middle of the saw, but they aren't using the full saw plate, and it just takes forever because you're only engaging this much. And this induces a couple of different problems. One, hey, it just takes you longer because you're not traveling that much distance, but if you're nibbling so much that the sawdust binds up in the tooth can no longer engage. So what you want to do is focus on taking long, smooth cuts, and it will go fairly quick if you do that one, even if you have a slightly dull saw like mine. Now feel free to practice that as much as you want. Just cut off very thin pieces and just do enough to get comfortable. I imagine 2 or 3 times and you should be okay. After that, let's go ahead and move on. You're going to get a lot of practice on getting comfortable with the saw in this exercise. So the first thing I want you to do is grab a ruler and mark down 8 1/4 inches. And make your layout line. Okay? And from there, we want to mark a line all the way around the board. And we talked about that in the section on making layout lines. I'm just going to use my dovetail marker. I place my pencil in that pencil line I just did, and I'm going to use my relative marking, my reference edge marking technique. I come down this way, closest to the reference edge, right on the line. Come down, closest to the reference edge. Lay the pencil on the line, mark it all the way around, and once again closer to the original reference edge, so I flip it around, and I should end up with a pencil line that matches up all the way around. Lined up perfectly. So, now we come up to the idea of what do we do with that line? In sawing, we have an option. We can take the line, so we're going to saw right on the line, so when we're done cutting, it's no longer there. A lot of times you will leave the line, meaning you snug up right next to the line, but then you don't remove any of the lead going all the way around. That's something you do quite a bit with dovetails, because when you lay out your dovetails, you're putting the lead on part of the wood that's going to slide up into the other piece. Now this one right here, I did it, I laid out my line, and I put my line right on that 8 1/4. So I'm going to try to split that line in half, and yes, that is something you can do. Reason being, half the lead was on one side of 8 1/4, the other half was on the other side. So I want to split it down the middle, and that's something you typically do when you're marking measurements right off the ruler. It's one of those things, kind of like when you go shoot a gun. You want to aim small, so at least you can get close. So right here, I'm going to try to split that line. So this is the side of the wood I want to keep, and I want to split the line, so I'm going to split and cut on this side of the half line. So what do? I use my finger. Because there is nothing for me to put my fingernail in, if I basically use this finger right here to kind of push it over to exactly the spot I want, and you can kind of just roll it around, nibble to get it started, come across and just allow that finger to come back down. That's one of those 3-point stance issues where you're bracing it down and then just saw straight down. Okay? And see how accurate you get. How easy is it to stay on that line going straight down when all you are doing is bringing the saw straight down. After that, see how plumb you are. I can tell right here, based on the bottom of it, that I got off a little bit coming down, so this angle isn't going to be exactly plumb. So on the next cut, let's see if we can, there's an easier way to get it plumb coming down this way, in addition to taking just half the line coming across the top. Okay, this time measure over 8 3/4 inches. So you put your saw on the end, come back over, measure out 8 3/4 inches, mark your pencil line, and mark all the way around just like you did before. So make my first line, closest to the reference edge, closest to the reference edge, and it should all line up perfectly. Good enough. So, how can we make sure we come down plumb and be dead on perfect across the top too? Well, the idea is to only saw one line at a time. I'm going to start the saw on the far side. I'm going to saw across the top, and once I've gotten across the top, I'm going to try and leave the saw in that saw curve over there and come down the front. That way I'm just following the line down here and then down here, forming a triangle, at which point I can right it back up and it should get perfectly plumb this time. So in order to do this cut, because I'm coming down the front, I need to get off of my bench hook just a tad bit, but it still works just the same. So here we go. I move it over the line using my index finger. I nibble to get it started. Very light cut. Once you get going, start using the saw plate. Now I'm all the way across the top. I've got half the line cut. Now I'm going to focus on keeping this point on the tip and coming down. So all I have to do is follow one line at a time. And once I get it going, after that point, just engage the whole thing. And now we can see we are fairly plumb this way, and we are fairly plumb that way, because you only had to follow one line at a time. Now that was pretty accurate, but let's see if we can get it even more accurate. This time I want you to measure out 7 9/16, which is basically 1/16 over a half. Mark it all the way around just like last time, and then we will see if we can make this even more accurate. So far what we've experienced is just sawing straight across the top and going straight down. We then experienced sawing across the top and coming down at an angle and then riding it back up, and that got us a lot plumber results. So let's see if we can get even more accurate. Once again, I'm going to try and take half the line, but this time I'm going to saw all the way across the top and stop. So nibble to get started, come across the top, and stop. I've got a kerf set right there. I'm now going to ride it up, put my saw in the kerf to get started, just saw across the top, very nice and easy. Do the same thing, flip, you can see I'm taking half the pencil line, get it started, come back over, whoops, I was pressing down a little bit there. Come back over, and then do the same for the top. So we end up, instead of having a pencil line all the way around, we have a saw kerf line coming all the way around. And I've gone all the way around the board one time. This time I'm going to saw, and because the saw wants to follow the path of least resistance, it makes it a lot easier to stay in line there. I just sawed a little bit, reverse it down, come back over, saw a little bit, reverse it over, saw a little bit. Now normally I only go around twice, but in this example we're going to go around 3 times, or maybe 2.5, because on this one right here it is probably going to pop off. And right now you can basically not even think about it, because it is going to follow those saw kerfs, and now you have a nice straight cut. You can see how the saw kerf went all the way around, but this is probably the most accurate one we've done. Dead on, dead on. So working your way around creates a path of least resistance for the saw kerf to follow. Now, I'm not a very big fan of a pencil. They have their place, and if you're doing construction or some big projects, they work very well. For fine furniture and smaller projects, the lines are just too thick for me. I mean, they can actually change thickness as you're working around the project just because the lead wears down. You're constantly sharpening them, they break off, and there's no tactile feel to them. For all those reasons, I much prefer a knife. And that's generally what you will see, because I can actually feel the results. The lines are a lot finer, so my aim can narrow in. So for this next step, let's try doing the same exact technique we just did with a pencil, except this time use a knife. So this time we want to measure out 10 11/16 inches. So a ½ inch is 8/16, so 10.5 is 8, 9, 10, 11. So I'm going to make a little nick right there, right at the spot I want. And that's generally how I work it. Now, the knife I prefer is a spear point knife, and I've talked about this earlier. It's got a flat side in there, so just make sure you put the flat side in your nick line, and this is just so much more accurate than a pencil, because I can actually feel the nick line. Then I come in, grab my tool, and when you're using a knife, you generally need to make 3 passes. The first pass just kind of scores the edge. Very light, not much happened there. Just kind of breaks the fibers. The second pass is a little bit firmer, and the third pass is firmer still. From here you can walk it around, and what I like about the knife line is I can feel that it clicks right in. I don't have to have any guesswork. So for people with bad eyesight like me, it just makes life a lot easier. 1, 2, 3, reverse it around. I can't see that side, but I can sure feel it. I just drag it over, I'm right in that line, pop it over. you do it all right, it will line up perfectly. So, once again, let's go twice around and see how we do. Starting in, I can come over. I'm trying to split that knife line, and if you do it right, you will actually see the slight ledge from where the knife got indented. Okay, we have our curve started. Curve started. Curve started. And as you can see, this is not a slow process. You can actually go pretty quickly. Curve started, and now we just want to follow the path of least resistance. Come straight down. And there we go. And let's check it out. A little spelching right there, but you can feel where my knife line is. You can got a little tiny ledge right there. I took the whole knife line there. A little ledge there. You can hear my fingernail. Little ledge right there, just below the surface. That's where the knife line was. Okay, so let's get some of these out of the way. Oh, did you hear that? Different notes, different frequencies. Okay, here we go. Let's do another one. This time, let's see if we can get even more accurate than just that knife line working way all the way around. So on this next one, let's go 10 and 3/32 of an inch. Now how can you find a 32nd of an inch if your ruler only goes to 16ths? Easy. Just split the difference in the ruler on your lines. So I've done my knife line all the way around at that 10 and 3/32 of an inch. And I did it pretty deeply on this one. I took 5 strokes on each side. So now I'm going to do what they call either creating a knife wall or a V-notch. And basically what you do is you come back maybe a 16th of an inch and with a chisel and just push down to the bottom of that line. And it creates a little tiny V-notch. Which the advantage of that one is it will get your saw teeth below the surface line and it will kind of slide in. Here, let's go to the board now, explain it better. Okay, so we have our board. And this is going to be the waste side. So when we made our knife line, we made sure the flat of the knife came in, so it came in straight down, and the V-notch came over here. The bevel came over there. So that was our knife line, and it went down fairly deeply. We're then coming back in with a chisel and wasting away to the bottom of that knife line. So you end up with this slope that comes up right up to the line we want. Now our saw plate comes down and the teeth are at an angle down like that. That's called the set. But when you slide that in, if you don't get right up next to the line, gravity will cause it to come down and it will hug up right below the surface of the board. So you get a nice straight line, crisp line because of the knife cut, but the saw will cut right up next to that ledge because it will kind of slide its way down. So it kind of helps you hug up against your knife line, this little V-cut. Now making these little V-notches doesn't take up that much time, and if you have a really critical cut, yeah, even the most experienced people might do this. But what I have found is that over time, the better saw you get, you stop using this as a crutch and more just for a refined cut to get that crisp edge. And you can get that crisp edge with just a basic knife line if you just saw straight. But as it is, we'll do the same technique. We'll go around twice, and it's just a lot easier hugging up to that line because you really don't have to think about it anymore. It just kind of falls right next to it because of that V-notch. And voila, a nice crisp cut. So we've used a knife line, done twice cuts all the way around. We've used a nice one with a V-notch and gone twice all the way around. So let's step backwards. You remember when we just cut across the top and then came down the front and then straightened it back out to make the square cut? Well, let's do that with the knife line, except now you don't have to mark all the way around. All you have to do is mark the front and the top and make your cut. This next one, let's do it at 7 and 25-30 seconds. And as you can see, if you start eliminating steps that you don't need, because if you're not going to use the back side of the board, why mark it out? This can go actually very, very quickly. And if all you're doing is cutting the interior parts, like your tenons and stuff like that, sometimes you don't have to be perfectly accurate. But that's pretty good. Now, there are going to be times in your joinery career where accuracy doesn't have to be perfect. I'm talking about like maybe the depth of a mortise into a tenon. Sometimes, you know, you just want to measure to the bottom and give yourself a little gap for glue to set into. But it would be nice to get it somewhat square and somewhat plumb. So is there a way to do that one without actually laying it out? And yes, there is. We're going to go back to our gravity and physics. Gravity, we have a weight up top. So if you can find the balance point for your saw, that is going to be plumb. Plus, we also have a nice shiny plate. That's why I like new saws. I'm not a very big fan of vintage saws, because you can see the reflection in the plate and you can see the reflection of the wood. When you line the wood up in the reflection, you can gain stuff. When it's set at 90 degrees in the reflection, you're pretty much at 45. When it's set at 180 degrees, you're pretty much at 90. So we can work with that to our advantage. So it looks like we only need one more key to make a full suite. So the next one's going to be right at 9 and 17/64 of an inch. Now don't worry if you haven't been writing these down. I'll put them in the notes below, along with some other measurements that we'll be using in a second. So I'll let you choose this time. However you want to cut it, cut me a 9 and 17/64 inch key. Okay, so what do we got? Hey, we're getting close. So we got close to the keys. The next step is what I want all of y'all to do is find the center of each one of these keys, both this way and this way. Once you find that center, I want you to make a saw curve going perpendicular right down to the halfway point in the middle of each one of these. And I'll show you a secret for doing that. First secret is buy the right tool for the job. I have a ruler here that's called a center scale, where 0 is in the middle and it goes 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 out. So basically all I have to do is get the same number on both sides and I know I have the center. But if you don't have that tool, what you can do is just line up the corners of it. And it might be a little bit difficult because this is more long than tall. Make your X, and wherever it crosses over should be close to the center, if not exactly right on. So right there is my center. Let's see how well we did with my 0 finder. I put 0 on the middle, and I have pretty close. Actually, I'm about an 1/8 off, but that's close enough for this little exercise. Now, if you don't have a gauge where you can measure out the center equal distance from both sides to get it dead on perfect, as long as you're consistent all the way across, you should be okay. So what you can do is just kind of eyeball it, lock your finger in, and just kind of mark them all at the same time without changing your finger, and it should be pretty much okay. It's close enough for this exercise. So what I've done is I've marked my line through the center. I've marked my line down halfway on both sides. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the line this time. I'm going to saw right on that line to get some good practice in. I'm going to start it up. And just like when I was doing that 90 degrees where I come down one side and then I come down the other, all I'm doing is keeping it on this opposite corner and coming down to my baseline on this side. And this is how you do joints like dovetails and stuff if you don't want to blow past your line. Then you can do the same thing to the other side, and just do one side at a time. And then you can just kind of flatten it out, and it should be okay. You got it down to your baseline on both sides. Do that to all your keys, and we'll come back, we'll go from there. Now that we've got all the center line cuts, we're going to do the same exact thing, an equal distance from either side of it. Now I'm going to have these measurements down on bottom so that we can get a consistent thing, because we basically have a C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C key pattern right here. And I prefer using dividers, but if you don't have dividers, you can just measure it out. But let me show you a quick trick with dividers. Dividers you occasionally want to sharpen. You always sharpen the outside, you never sharpen the inside. That gives you a nice good point. And the reason why you want that point is most rulers have an indentation in them. So if you want to set it up perfectly, you can basically set one side of the ruler to the other end and then just fit it right into that indentation. And when it clicks in, you know you've got the perfect setting. The reason why I like using dividers is because I can equally set it out by just rotating it over, where there's a chance if I am doing a measurement, I'll get it off. So from here, just drop your knife into that little divot. I moved it that time. Make your layouts and cut down to your baseline. Now cutting down to the baseline, like we've been doing right here, is an operation that you're going to be doing a lot more often than through cutting when you're cutting joineries. Because a lot of times you're cutting tenons and stuff like that. So you have to stop at a certain point. So it's very nice to be able to just focus on one side of the line, cut straight down until you hit your baseline on this side, and then you can just slowly right it up. And stop when you hit your baseline on the other side. And that way you know you will get a nice flat cut. Now if your saw is binding up on you and you're starting to get, it just binds up, a good thing to use is paraffin wax. Try it out. You can buy it in the canning section of your grocery store, and it will make your sawing go a lot easier. And it will not affect gluing or finishing or anything like that, because it basically gets taken away with sawdust. Oh yeah, a lot easier. Now each key is going to have a different measurement out from the center, so just make sure you get the right measurements and go ahead and make these same cuts on all the other keys and come on back. Okay, now I told you earlier that by the end of this exercise you will be a lot more comfortable with your sawing skills, techniques, and all that kind of stuff. This is where we're going to get the practice in. What I want you to do is in between each one of these lines going to the center, I want you to make at least 10 lines. Just grab your square, grab a pencil, use a pencil for this one, and just mark off 10 lines. At least, if not more. Preferably more. Now this exercise is going to take you maybe 15 or 20 minutes. It's the equivalent of going out to the driving range and hitting 100 golf balls, or going up to the boxing gym and hitting the bag for an hour or two. It's a lot of repetition to get you good muscle memory. Now with all these lines, what I want you to do is practice sawing on the left side of the line, practice sawing on the right side of the line, practice sawing splitting the line, practice sawing taking the line. Work on your accuracy, and over the course of 15, maybe 20 minutes, you're going to get a good feel for it. Now, some of y'all's hands might cramp up. Ask yourself why, because they shouldn't be. This is not a death grip kind of situation. You are just basically holding the saw in. If your shoulder starts to get sore, ask yourself why. Are you out of alignment? All that kind of stuff. This is not a hard work exercise. This is a skill-based exercise. So, what I want you to do is we're going to be removing all of this with a chisel, and it makes it a lot easier if you break up the fibers. So go ahead and saw all these lines on both of them. Once again, you might spend 15, maybe 20 minutes getting this exercise done, but by the time you're done with the exercise, you will have confidence in your sawing skills. Really focus on it. Just don't blast through it and get it done. Aim for the lines. take the lines, separate the lines. This is the practice you need to get better. Okay, now we've got all the fibers in our waste all severed up, so we're going to chop out the waste. So you need to take a look at the grain direction. Remember, this is stuff we covered in chapter 1. You don't want to chop into wood in a way that it would want to split into the stuff you want to keep. You want to chop it so it'll split away from it, so you'll get a nice clean cut. Also, I prefer to chop my boards putting it this way and holding the chisel that way, simply because it's much easier to determine straight up and down this way than it is this way. So just set it up, put it on your bench hook so you don't damage whatever table you're working on, and chop away. Also, notice I'm not going to try and take the whole thing in one bite. I'm going to take about half of it, come down, chop it out, then come back in, see which way it cracked out. See, it cracked out this way, which goes against what the grain was telling me, so I'm going to turn it around and come back the other way. And just chop out about half of it. Oh, much nicer. Chop out about half of it all the way down. And then you can work your way back to that line, doing about half each time. And if you keep doing it that way, eventually you're going to get a fairly clean cut. So now I've only got maybe a half a millimeter less, so I'm just going to put it straight in the line. I'm going to really focus on keeping it straight up and down and just chop straight down. And you'll notice you'll end up with a fairly clean section. That'll be very easy to clean up with sandpaper. Once you got all the center sections chopped out, you should have a fairly clean setup. And this will be part of the key that nobody's going to see, so you can leave it right there, but if you want to clean it up, feel free to grab a rasp or wrap paper around a stick or something and just clean it up. Just light passes until you're happy with it. That's all that's going to matter at this point in time. And once you get the whole collection together, go ahead and play around with it for a second. It should be pretty close. A little bit off right now. So let's go back and talk about vibrations again, waves, that kind of stuff, to figure out how we can tune these things up. So real quickly, let's analyze what we've done so far. We're talking about frequency today and how it impacts our sawing aspect and other things in life. Now, frequency is a measure of vibrations, resolutions, or waves graphed out over time. And well, you can get consistent vibrations if all aspects are the same. For example, I have two rulers here, two on this side, two on that side. Both of them have a magnet on them. They will both vibrate at roughly exactly the same speed, or pretty close as best I can. But what would happen if I shortened one up? Just a little bit. Shortened it up about a ½ inch. Now, you can tell it vibrates a lot quicker than the other ones. They are not in sync. Do it even more. And even more out of sync. Now, what other things could we do to increase the vibration level? Well, if you have mass out on the end, if you were to remove that mass, if I remove these two magnets, all of a sudden these will vibrate quite a bit differently. What would happen if I just cut it in half and I removed one of the rulers, left everything else the same, and then put my two magnets back on? So I reduced its thickness. Now it vibrates a lot quicker. Well, what have we done here? We have our keys. The keys are different lengths, and in order to slow it down, we reduce its thickness so the outside mass can go up and down a little bit lower. So it would get a deeper sound, a more bass sound. Now, how does that apply to sawing? Well, if you remember when we were talking about how saws were construction, a lot of saws were tapered. And that tapering allowed for different vibration points at different points in the saw, because one might have been thicker, one might have been thinner. So, if you have different vibration points, they would counteract each other. This is also sometimes you see people adding weight inside maybe your car. you have a vibration, one of the door panels is vibrating, what do the mechanics do? They put double-sided tape on the inside or the outside at specific points to add mass, to add resistance to change its vibration point to reduce squeaks and rattles. So, taking that into mind, these are definitely out of tune. So if we want to affect their tuning, we need to either remove weight or distribute the weight a little bit differently. What can we do? Well, just like moving those rulers around or taking magnets off, we could shave away a little wood on the sides. Or we can shave a little more wood out of the middle or off of these sides inside here. All different kinds of things to tune it. But let's also look at some other cool vibration aspects of it. If I were to put a key down here, it doesn't have much sound. The reason why, the table itself is inhibiting the vibration. But if I were to put it up on 2 points, it vibrates. Why is that? Well, these 2 points are close to a point in a normal vibration wave where it passes the median line. And if you vibrate something like this, notice the center section goes up separately than the 2 middle. So I can actually hold it right here and it will still vibrate the same way because those 2 points aren't moving. So our idea is we want to find those 2 balance points on all our keys so that when we position this one, we can get the best sound so it's sitting on something won't interfere with the sound and adjust its tune. So let's first find out that vibration point. And if you remember, I asked you to save a little bit of sawdust. That's where this comes into account. So if I take my sawdust, and these are just sitting on top of these 2 dowels, so they are pretty much free floating. Now I'm just going to spread some sawdust out on these keys. Okay? And if you remember when I shook that big ruler, those some of those sections didn't move that much. Well, if we sit here and we bounce the keys over, you will find that the sawdust will tend to gravitate towards a part of the keys that don't move. See, they're getting closer and closer and closer to 2 points that aren't moving. So if we continue to bang on our keys, a lot of the sawdust will pop off, and eventually you're going to end up with 2 very fine points where you can identify where that vibration wave is going to be neutral. So I want you to do that one. And when you find that center section, just mark it with a pencil. And it'll probably be equal distance from both sides. Okay, I'm going to call this lesson there. We've learned how to cut bigger sticks into smaller sticks, and I showed you a lot of techniques to gain a lot of accuracy without really having to learn a whole bunch of skills. These are very basic cuts. Stuff that you would use for Morrison tin-end joinery or anything like that, where maybe you're cutting halfway into the board or cutting through the board. You need to make sure you get dead on square, and these same techniques can get you to specific angles, and I hope you can see that one. And they apply to much more saws than just the back saw. So for homework, to finish this particular lesson up, you've got to tune these keys up and find those notes. And remember, if you need to lower the note a little bit, just remove a little wood from the middle. If you need to raise it up, remove a little wood from the outside. And I do suggest if you're going to do any rounding over or sanding, you do that before you tune them up. Me personally, these are not going to be tuned perfectly to C, D, G, A, B, C, those kind of stuff. Not to the thing. I'm just going to tune them to their set, meaning I'm going to get these outside tuned to be the same note at different ends of the scale, and I'll just kind of balance these things out so at least I can play a recognizable tune. It will work for what we are doing. And for the next lesson, we're going to continue on with sawing techniques, except we're not going to be talking about back saws. We're going to be talking about the unusual saws, the turning saws, the coping saws, the flush cut saws. And I'm going to show you some joinery techniques to turn a board into a box, and specifically we are going to make a resonator box chamber for these keys, so you can have a cool sounding xylophone that'll magnify the sound up. So I hope you'll come back for that. And if you stick around towards the end of this video, I will have a time-lapse of our latest artwork for t-shirts and posters, one like I'm doing right now. So I hope you enjoyed this video, learned a few things, and I want you to remember one last thing. It is always worth the effort to learn, create, and share with others. Y'all be safe and have fun.